He played gods, but he lived in hiding. For 40 years, Ramon Novarro wore the mask. The cameras loved his beauty. Hollywood demanded his silence. Then, on Halloween 1968, the walls came crashing down, and the truth spilled across his bedroom floor in blood. What killed him wasn't the violence. It was the life he'd never been allowed to live. Stay with us, because behind every screen idol lies a story cinema forgot. In 1899, a boy was born in Durango, Mexico, to a prominent and cultured family. His name was Ramón Gil Samaniego. 20 years later, that same boy, now Jose Ramon, would step off a trolley in Los Angeles as a refugee, his childhood erased by revolution. The Mexican Revolution had torn his world apart, and his family fled north, seeking safety, leaving behind everything except the weight of their Catholic faith and their need for him to become someone respectable. He was the eldest of 13. Expectation was written into his bones. Hollywood, in those early days, was still being invented. There were no strict rules about who could become a star, and there was no internet to dig up secrets. Novarro began as a dancer, then an extra, then slowly, deliberately, he transformed. A theater manager renamed him Ramon Novarro after a grandfather, but a secretary's typo changed Novarro to Novarro, a small clerical error that would follow him into legend. He was always becoming someone else, always correcting the record, always one step removed from his own name. By 1922, he had caught the eye of director Rex Ingram and earned a pivotal role in The Prisoner of Zenda. The next year, Scaramouche made him a swashbuckler, a name audiences whispered with electricity. But nothing prepared Hollywood for Ben-Hur in 1925. When Novarro stepped onto that screen in barely their costumes, performing the chariot race as Judah Ben-Hur, something shifted in the cultural air. MGM executives watched audience reactions with astonishment. Women fainted, men stared. The studio gave him a raise to $10,000 a week, a fortune that made him one of the highest-paid actors in America. After Rudolph Valentino's unexpected death in 1926, Novarro inherited the crown of the Latin lover. The image was perfect. The public adored him. The image promised everything: romance, passion, danger, desire. But here is what the image could not say: that Novarro was trapped. By the late 1920s, Novarro had achieved what millions dream of and few obtain. He was a god on screen. Yet his private life was a battlefield. He was a devout Catholic, torn by faith and sexuality in an era that offered no reconciliation between the two. Early in his career, in the early 1920s, he had shared a romantic relationship with composer Harry Partch, a man working as an usher at the Los Angeles Philharmonic. When Novarro's stardom grew, he ended the affair. The price of fame meant the price of absence, from love, from authenticity, from himself. He invested the wealth, carefully, purchasing a stunning Spanish-style home in West Adams for $12,000, then spending $100,000 on renovations. He could build the perfect exterior. What he could never build was peace. The transition to talking pictures in 1929 should have been seamless. Novarro was charming and multilingual. He could sing. He made Devil May Care and The Call of the Flesh, early MGM musicals that should have cemented his place in the new era. But the talkies changed something fundamental. Silent film had allowed him to be a blank canvas, beautiful, mysterious, undefined. Dialogue demanded characterization. Sound required a voice. And slowly, inexplicably, his appeal began to fade. By the early 1930s, his star was still bright, but the heat was dimming. He starred opposite Greta Garbo in Mata Hari in 1931, a triumph that should have revived his fortunes. Instead, by mid-decade, the roles grew smaller. Character parts replaced leading roles. Then, in the late 1930s, MGM declined to renew his contract. He was no longer essential. He was no longer young. He was no longer the myth. What happens to a man when the world stops looking at him? Novarro found one answer in alcohol. Biographers and friends have long traced his drinking to the conflict between his Catholic upbringing and his sexuality, to the loss of stardom, to the slow erosion of a carefully constructed life. There were car accidents, several serious ones, usually late at night when no one was watching. There were years of struggling to find work, taking bit parts in B pictures, accepting minor television roles in shows like Bonanza and Dr. Kildare to pay the bills. He appeared on The High Chaparral, a Western series, in 1969, his final screen appearance. Though few remember him there, the cameras had moved on to younger men who had not been forced to hide themselves. His physical beauty, which had once commanded salaries that made him one of the richest actors in America, began its inevitable decline. The face that had launched 1,000 fantasies grew lined. The body that had stopped traffic in Ben-Hur softened with age and drink. This is a particular cruelty of the entertainment industry. It worships youth and discards it ruthlessly. By his 60s, Novarro was wealthy enough to live comfortably. His real estate investments had paid off. But he was invisible. No one recognized him on the street. The fan mail had stopped years ago. He was a ghost in his own city, passing through a world that had once trembled at his name. In his later years, reportedly, he sought companionship through networks of young men for hire. This was not uncommon among aging Hollywood men. The callboy services that catered to the wealthy and famous operated with the implicit protection of the studios and the police. It was a transaction, a practical arrangement. It was also dangerous. A secret kept in a city built on secrets. On October 29, 1968, the night before Halloween, Novarro invited two young men to his home at 3110 Laurel Canyon Boulevard. They were brothers, Paul Ferguson, 22, and Tom Ferguson, 17, men from the street, living together in poverty. They believed, based on rumors circulating through the escort underworld, that Novarro kept thousands of dollars hidden somewhere in his house, possibly behind a painting. What happened next has been told many times, but the details matter because they reveal not just violence, but the mythology that grew around it. The brothers tormented him for hours, searching for money that did not exist. He told them repeatedly, "There is no money." But they did not believe him. The autopsy would later reveal injuries to his face, his nose, his chest, his arms, his knees, his genitals. His feet and hands were tied together with an electrical cord. He was beaten until he choked on his own blood, until asphyxiation became mercy. What Novarro did not know, what nobody would know for decades, was that the violence was not really about money at all. Years later, Paul Ferguson, incarcerated and attempting reform, gave an interview to biographer Andres Suarez. He said finally the truth. When Novarro kissed him, Ferguson reacted not with desire, but with rage. He called it homosexual panic, a term rooted in shame and Catholic guilt. He blamed his upbringing, the church's teachings, his own internalized homophobia. He said his brother was barely involved. He said the robbery narrative was a cover story, a way to make the crime comprehensible to a world that would never understand the real reason. A man ashamed of his own sexuality, confronted with his own desire, and responding with violence to silence it. The murder made headlines around the world, but in a peculiar way. It was covered as crime, as scandal, as tabloid spectacle. In the sensationalist aftermath, rumors multiplied like infections. Gossip columnists and conspiracy theorists added details that had no basis in fact. Most infamously, a story about a black dildo supposedly inserted into Novarro's body, a detail that appeared in Kenneth Anger's infamous Hollywood Babylon and became the stuff of lurid legend. The story was fabricated. The invented detail eclipsed the real tragedy, that a man's life had been erased, and now his death was being rewritten as punchline. By 1970, the Ferguson brothers had been convicted. Paul would later serve his time, and eventually, painfully, accept responsibility for what he had done. Tom, the younger brother, was found less culpable. The trial revealed aspects of Novarro's private life that his family had kept hidden for decades. His siblings, devoutly Catholic, chose not to speak of it publicly. Some of them blamed alcohol for his unorthodox behavior. His cousin Dolores Del Rio, herself a major star, said nothing. The family's shame became part of his legacy. Yet here is the truth that matters. Ramon Novarro was a trailblazer. He was the first successful Latin American actor to achieve stardom in Hollywood. He pioneered a path that others would follow. He carried the weight of representation in an industry that had never seen a brown face become immortal on the silver screen. He was an artist. He wanted to sing, to perform on stage, to be more than the object the camera demanded. He worked with giants: Norma Shearer, Joan Crawford, Greta Garbo. He carried films that still survive, that still move audiences nearly a century later. But he was also a man forced into silence. He was an artist whose deepest self had to be hidden. He was a Catholic conflicted by his faith. He was a human being reduced, by his era and his industry, to an image: beautiful, marketable, utterly false. When the image finally shattered, so did he. His death did not have to happen. It happened because a scared young man, taught to hate the very desire he felt, met an aging actor who had spent 4 decades hiding. It happened because the world had never given Novarro permission to be himself. It happened because Hollywood, for all its glamour, has always been built on the commodification and erasure of truth. Today, we remember Ramon Novarro not for the invented scandal, not for the fabricated details that made his death a joke in Hollywood Babylon, but for what he was: an actor of genuine talent, a pioneer whose face launched 1,000 dreams, and a human being who deserved, in life and in death, to be seen completely. If you've ever felt the weight of the image others demand of you, of the gap between who you are and who the world needs you to be, you understand something of what Novarro carried every day of his public life. That invisible burden, the cost of being desired while being denied, is his real legacy. Subscribe to learn more stories of the people Hollywood forgot.